My name is Dacre Lanham. I'm with the Rock and Roll Studio. And Mr. Stoker, who has come here to Imaginarium 2023, our 10-year anniversary. So far, have we had a good time this weekend?
Stephanie, it's been great. The sales have exceeded my expectations, and I wish I could have brought more books, but that 50-pound weight limit in the suitcases. So, it's really neat. It's my first one here, and people seem to gravitate towards me and Dracula and my writings. And my presentation was well attended, so I'm really happy.
I had the pleasure of sitting in on one of them. I think it was Friday, and it was, you had all the original notes from.
That's right. Those were representations, about 40 of the 124 pages of Dracula notes that now reside in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. I've got copies of those. And this was sort of this workshop where I led people through the experience, shortened version of what I did over 12 years. Whereas take a look at this, number one, can you read his terrible handwriting? And can you decipher what he's getting at? And where some of these things on these papers that everybody had their own to look at, where they may have showed up in the Dracula novel. Then I kind of walk people through this sort of whole idea of discovery.
It was actually really, really cool to see everything that was going on, when you were listing, okay, what do you think that these are? And I was like, these are traits of vampires. That's exactly what these are, the undead, non-living. And as soon as I said it, you said it were they're traits.
That's the traits that he pulled out of different books. You can kind of see he was very studious about writing Dracula. And he listed his sources. You could see Emily Gerard helped him figure out certain traits. Sabine Bailey Gould, other authors who have done research, Brand benefited from, just like you and I do when we do our writings now. You go on Google or you go to a library and you figure out what's the latest coolest little factoids that we can insert in our novels to make people believe that things are real, or they're just more in depth than maybe we have in our understanding.
And actually, in the beginning of Dracula, it says this is, I believe it's something along the lines of this is based on a.
Yes, that preface is very convincing, and I'll just tell you this: the preface that is in Dracula is not the original preface. The original one is even more convincing that this was based on real things, real people, real places. For whatever reason, it was reduced down to just a paragraph. Still somewhat convincing, but I don't know why it was reduced down. I'm just not sure. Maybe his publisher thought this would have been too darn scary.
Maybe. I know reading the book and then doing research, a couple of things myself, I saw a couple of your interviews, I was watching all of those, and I saw where he had made footnotes in certain books where in a library some had found, and they were in the margin because they were it was almost like a treasure hunt. You read this book and then it would lead you to that one, and I thought that was genius, actually.
What you're talking about is, for your listeners, the London Library discovered the 26 books that he used for his research, and they all had little notations in the margins. And it was like a treasure hunt, because as soon as I saw a reference to, for instance, a volcano, then I was like, another book had something else that said volcano, home of the devil, and this, and it all sort of came together.
And not a lot of people know that the original Dracula, it actually had a volcano eruption at the very end. It was deleted scenes, if you will.
It was a deleted scene from the typescript. So it never actually made it into Dracula. It was just in the typescript, and for whatever reason. And I think I know the reason. I think it's because Bram's publisher didn't want a definitive ending to the count. They want to leave it ambiguous. So the end as we know it, Quincy Morris stabs him with a Bowie knife, not a stake.
Right.
And Jonathan Harker slits his throat, doesn't cut off his head totally, no garlic put in. So that leaves the door open. And at that point, Stephanie, the count crumbles into dust. Is this an escape, or is he being destroyed? If volcano was involved, I think it would have been destroyed. But since there was no volcano, we spilled it out. We didn't do a crafty escape mechanism for the count.
Very, and that's one of the things that I love about it, is that there's always a way to grow and make sequels with it. And there's been so many movies about Dracula, and so many versions of Dracula. First, he's an evil monster, and then, of course, he's this romantic lover who's loving us a thousand possibilities of time.
That's
to find.
yeah, that's from the '92 Coppola version, and it's wonderful. It's not Bram, but
Right.
as you say, and as I maintain, these adaptations, these inspirations, keep the novel alive. If everybody, or if the first guy just did Dracula as it was written, which actually was done in 1977 by the BBC with Louis Jourdan's Dracula, if they stopped there, we'd all be bored. And if they just kept recreating it exactly as written, we would be dull. But as you get the mark of a good director, screenwriters, and they change things up a bit, we're all looking out for the next best version. Recently we had the Renfield movie with Nicolas Cage.
That's actually
It was funny, and it had some interesting sort of mental health issues that Renfield obviously suffers from. But I'll tell you what I'm really looking forward to. Coming up in August was The Last Voyage of the Demeter.
yes.
Because that to me looks like a real horror movie. It is exploiting something that Bram never got to fully write because of length.
Yeah.
The full voyage of the Demeter, all we get is we know that the boxes of dirt, the 50 boxes of dirt with Dracula in one of them, was loaded into the ship in Varna, bound for Whitby. And then you get these little messages along the way that a crewman saw something weird and maybe he jumped overboard, or maybe he was drained with blood. And then the captain lashes his hands to the wheel, and it somehow by a miracle comes in under a very strange supernatural storm into Whitby. But that's it. This movie coming out is going to give us the whole version. So there's still plenty of things that we can get enjoyment from, we can get scared from, based on, things that were cut out of the novel, things that weren't fully exploited in the novel.
That's what I think. That's one of my main things, and my boyfriend Jason are the favorite thing. Our most favorite thing about Dracula is that it always continues. Like you've got the version of Dracula where they say he was cheating,
Yeah.
and then that was I believe it was Dracula 2000. That's what that was. Then you have another one where he was this evil demonic son of the devil. Then you have the romantic lover. Then you have the one who just wants to create an army to take over the world.
Dracula Untold, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great. There's a lot to play with. It's a big sandbox,
Yes.
as they say. And when creative screenwriters dig into the original lore that my great granduncle looked at, and goes back to some of those sources like Jim Hart did in the Coppola film, he created a very plausible explanation for how Vlad the Impaler became Prince Dracula, Count Dracula the vampire. That obviously really didn't happen. Vlad the Impaler wasn't a blood drinker, he was bloodthirsty in history. But Hart did something really interesting, which I think is very cool. He found lore that Vlad the Impaler's wife committed suicide rather than let herself be captured by the Turks when Vlad is out fighting. So she committing suicide creates mortal sin to the church, cannot be buried in a consecrated ceremony in a consecrated grave. Dracula comes back from fighting that day, fighting for the church and Christianity, and finds out that his wife is dead forever. He rebels against the church, stabs the cross, drinks the blood. There's a somewhat plausible explanation for the origins of Count Dracula. The movie Dracula Untold, Luke Evans, does something different. But it's all based on old folklore that is somewhat believable. And that's what I think makes it really cool.
But a historian like me with Dracula, when I think of him, and I hate because this is my version of it, I always think of him as this romantic.
Yeah.
All I will think of him as. I don't know.
That's okay.
But then Jason, he loves him as like Bela Lugosi,
Yes.
the one who wanted to kill Mina. We tried several times to kill her. Was not in love with her. Was infatuated with her
Yeah.
blood, not her.
Right.
And then you have other people that like the Dracula 2000, where it goes back to saying human truths, and when he tried to make himself
Yeah.
broken, God raised him undead or undamned as your great great uncle. He was the first original one that created that word, I'm dead.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting.
It is. It definitely blurs the edges of life and death and the dead. What a perfect term.
And also, there was one question that I had because I was reading up on it on why he decided to write Dracula, and it was back when he was living. Most of like English British were worried about their blood being tainted by sleeping with other people, like outsiders.
Right. The others, if you got to put this in perspective, Bram wrote it in 1890, 1897. And at that time, the British Empire was all powerful. But they were sort of spreading around the world. And that was fine. They didn't want the world to spread back to London. They were quite happy taking over other countries and managing things. But when some of those less desirables made their way back to their wonderful London to do the nasty jobs, working on the docks and so on, they weren't quite so interested with all that. And then breeding with them. So that outsider, the other that Dracula represents, the guy from the deep, dark, eastern country of Transylvania, and comes here and has lots of money, buying up houses, taking our women, taking our virgins, not very popular.
Taking the Minas and Lucy's.
Exactly. That was a fear. So Bram was sensitive enough to capitalize on those existing fears and place it in the pages in between this mustard colored, covers and name it Dracula. That hit a nerve with me. Plus, it was not too far removed from the real vampire scares of the Middle Ages that happened in England as well, and America. Bram actually had a newspaper article on the vampire scare from New England from 1896 in his notes. So he knew that this paranoia of bodies being reanimated, which they really weren't, the problem was people didn't understand germ theory. So as the plague, consumption, other diseases, tuberculosis in America were floating around, people were not understanding how these germs were being passed on. The contagious nature was, so they thought that the bodies were coming out of the grave, sucking the life out of the living, when really it was the germs. This struck a nerve. And again, this is vampire scares, Middle Ages, Bram packaged in a way that he combined them with the scariness of the other, bringing in these weird diseases.
That makes a lot of sense. I remember we discussed it recently when I was in the on Friday about how it is like around tuberculosis and all that.
Right. Bram's mother survived at the age of 12 the cholera epidemic that swept through Western Ireland. It came in on the ships, and the rats came in on the people. Again, it was brought in from other places when travel and trade were improving, and these ships were bringing in, but they were bringing in less desirable things, like these diseases that when they hit the shores of Ireland, nobody knew how to contain it. So these poor nurses and doctors who would be passionate about these people dying of the cholera, they were catching it themselves. They didn't have the masks and the gloves and all the hazmat stuff that we use today. So this was a real fear that his mother realized and witnessed. She passed it on to Bram in the form of bedtime stories, and he used it. He capitalized on it in a brilliant way.
We really did. I mean, I think it's one of the best-selling books. I see it everywhere. There is not one bookstore that you walk in and hear them all.
First of all, it's never been out of print because it's now public domain since '62. So it doesn't cost anything to get any rights to publish it now. Now, what I do with this stuff does cost some money because I'm adding my own content, right? So I'm adding things to it. I annotate it. I've written a prequel and written a sequel, keeping up with it, adding things to it to sort of contribute to what's going on and new things to bring to the old legacy.
I just want to say, like, I see that you have your books that are here. You have the
prequel and the sequel. Got some graphic novels. I've got a book coming out, an NFT edition of Dracula, which is a digital edition with all kinds of things that were taken out of the original at the typescript phase. So that's coming out in October. Working on a documentary film with a fellow Jason Figgis in Ireland, Chris McCauley, Stokerverse. We've got a RPG game. We got a board game. More graphic novels coming out. Return of Dracula with Scratch Comics. So staying very busy, as you say, keeping Bram's legacy alive, but adding to it. You know, not leeching from it. I'm adding to it with new content, new stories. They're all within the theme of what really how Bram inspired me.
It's almost like building an empire.
It is. It's just expanding that universe that Bram started. This Stokerverse. Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. I know that my family, my aunt, she, I don't know how 100% true this is, but she divulged when I had family histories. Of course, we're from Germany. We go all the way to Bulgaria, Hungary, and she divulged a little bit more into it. She said we're actually related to Elizabeth Bathory, distant cousins. But then also, flexed.
Yeah, that makes sense because they were distantly related. Yeah.
Yes. And I don't know 100%, like I can't say, oh, I'm his long lost relative.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought it was a little interesting reading through and reading about his wives and then looking at actual pictures of him. And I'm like, I kind of can see the resemblance, but I guess if you want something so bad, you'll always see it. But it was a little interesting when I was
Yeah, that's it. Well, you know, I used Elizabeth Bathory as a central character
I do know
in
that.
the sequel, so there we
She,
go.
she is not a force to be reckoned with, that's for sure.
She's a serious kick-ass. Good to have a strong female in that.
We did I did a whole history project about her, and then actually in school, because I was on drama team, we had to submit our own videos, like our songs, and they had to be based off the movies like you had asked.
Yeah.
So I did for and Lanham, love song from them.
Oh yeah.
And me and a group of people, we got in the woods, had the classic Nina red dress on, and we just did a whole video.
Nice.
We ended up winning first place 2 years in a row.
Good for you.
So
That's great.
it was nice.
Good for you.
But I will not take any more time up. I see people who are anxious to leave here. It was one thing that I wanted to ask you. What was your main influence? Was your biggest influence that like helped you?
Other than Bram Stoker,
Other than him?
That would be too easy.
Like your creative process. Oh,
I love reading anthology novels, historical based fiction. And to me that is my inspiration, is helping people read history endlessly and read it in a way that they can tell a good story. And he's done that for me. Understand medieval history, modern day history. When I read Ken Follett, I go, geez, if I could even come close to that with my Dracula and Stokerverse, then I'm worthy of that's my inspiration.
that's actually kindred spirits are here because I'll sit up late at night and I will read every bit of history. I'll watch something on TV. They'll mention something, and I have to go down like the rabbit hole for this statement and every.
You know, as we say, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. And Follett does that. Bram Stoker's done it as well. I'm trying to be the same.
And you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here at Imaginarium. So good to be welcome.
All right, thank you.
My name is Stephanie.
And Dacre Stoker.